Welcome to the Policy and Planning Committee for the 5th of February 2026. I'll open with a karakia timatanga. Whakataka ki te uro, whakataka ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā tā tara ki tai, ihi aki ana te atakura he teo, he huka he hauhanga, haumie huie, tai kie. Right, we have no one for the public forum. There may be an apology for early departure from Councillor Mayhem, but we shall see how we go with that. So we'll move to item 4, the confirmation of the agenda. Are you seconding or are you?
I informed you yesterday I'm also an apology for early departure.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I move that the committee confirms the agenda without addition or alteration. I have a seconder, Deputy Mayor Lucas. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against, abstentions, I declare that the motion is carried. Item 5, declarations of interest. Are there any changes since our last meeting? Therefore, I move that the committee notes the elected members' interest register attached at attachment A and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lucas. I am going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against, abstentions, the motion is carried. Move to Part A, reports. The Dunedin City Council submission on the Infrastructure Funding and Finance Act Amendment Bill. And we have speaking to the report Dr. Anna Johnson, Bede Morrissey and Tony Nelms. Kia ora, welcome. Do you have any opening comments?
No, we're happy to proceed to questions.
Right, does anyone have any questions? Mr. Chambers, sorry, Councillor Chambers. You.
Thank you. Yeah, just thank you. Just looking at page 17 of our papers today, the summary of considerations. And that's a summary of the considerations in regard to the submission. It's not about the bill, it's about the submission.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm just struggling with the tick box bit, fit with strategic framework, in that surely our submission should be a positive, should tick that the submission fits with our strategy. But to say that the submission we're making detracts from our strategy, it doesn't seem quite logical.
I think that might be around that the fit with the strategic framework.
Yeah.
I think that that's about which strategy it aligns with in this case. So if we're looking at that, it aligns with the future or detracts from the future development strategy because it's impacting on our choices, but it's not really applicable to the social wellbeing strategy because it's about planning. So possibly that's where it fits in. I don't know who ticked the boxes there.
Thank you for the question. My thoughts are that it's just because the Infrastructure Funding Financing Act basically is enabling other agencies to develop infrastructure that they can levy on the beneficiaries, which ultimately is would be recovered by ratepayers. So I guess I'm thinking that, again, I didn't tick that box, sorry, but my thinking is that it's detracting from that because we're losing some of that potential control there with it moving to other providers potentially.
Yeah, so the bill might be detracting, but the submission shouldn't be, if you understand me. Our submission should be supporting us, worded in a way that supports our strategy.
I think we'll have a look at the summary of considerations and perhaps have a discussion about how that is filled in. I just have a question around, it's on page 18, it's also in the summary of considerations, where it talks about the proposal itself could have significant future financial implications for the council. Can you just expand on what that might mean?
I'll make Mayor Sophie. I think while the team are looking to formulate a response, what we're seeing here on a number of topics is that there's a strong desire to create infrastructure and to affect immediate change, but that doesn't necessarily contemplate the ongoing legacy costs associated with that. So I anticipate that could be part of the reason why that statement is made.
Yeah, that's what it's targeting. It's around, basically the levy will provide the financing for the infrastructure up front, so that's the capital side sorted out, but obviously once we own the assets, there's an ongoing requirement, I guess, to maintain those assets. There's operating costs and the like, so there's potential implications there,
Is that if the costs are shifting to ratepayers, basically?
Well, it will be that sorry.
No, I'll let me jump in. So there's a couple of issues that we've raised in the submission, and one is what Tony's just outlined, which is that this funding covers a way of addressing capital costs, but it doesn't deal with operational costs. And the related matter is the design of the infrastructure, and that often the design of infrastructure that is developer-led can be a bit piecemeal. Sometimes it can be more expensive to build, but also to operate. So, for example, you might get a lot of individual stormwater ponds or individual detention tanks, each which requires council to fund staff to maintain and check them and monitor them and whatnot, rather than a holistic system that we can do through spatial planning and strategically plan growth, where we can plan infrastructure from the get-go to operate cost efficiently in the long term. So this sort of reactive approach tends to cost council more to operate long term and than a planned system does.
Mm-hmm. So does that relate to, on page 21, it just talks about the expect the private infrastructure is delivered at speed, but is expected to meet public service standards. So is that an issue about private infrastructure meeting those public service standards?
No, usually because there is an approval process, there's the ability to ensure that the infrastructure that's put in meets a particular standard. It's more about the fact that the infrastructure is just dealing with the immediate development, and so you end up with little bits and pieces of network that all need to be monitored and maintained and operated, rather than a more efficiently designed network. And now I'm getting outside my area of expertise because I'm not an engineer, and Mr. Ward can tell you more about that.
I'm pretty sure that I understand. Now I've got Councillor Sims and Councillor Lund.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie, and I'd like to start by absolutely congratulating the staff that have put this paper together. I thought it was an exceptional and equitable submission. But there were two things that I struggled with. One was that there's a great deal of crossover between the two submissions that are not easily necessarily understood, and I worried a bit about that. The questions that I have, though, is that, clearly there are some specific issues for Dunedin, well, not just related to Dunedin, but very different issues for Dunedin than perhaps Auckland or Christchurch or other large centres, and I wondered whether the submission highlighted that enough, and in particular, my concern is around the outlying townships such as Waitati and Middlemarch and Allenton. And what I wanted to ask you is, what is the intent of the government here? Is the intent of the government to say that growth and development is good, therefore the impediment of paying for infrastructure should be, we would like to help to remove that? Or are they trying to drive cities towards being, much more concentrated on a central area, as opposed to people making a choice to live at Waitati or Middlemarch? Do you have an opinion on that?
Well, I guess just to your first point, there's 3 submissions that staff prepared all at once. So there's the planning bill submission, which is coming to council. And I think the planning, and they almost need to be read collectively because they're all addressing the Going for Growth package, which involves changes to the resource management system and changes to this funding system that are intended to work together. And so therefore, some of those broader points are raised more fulsomely in that other submission. And staff sort of, I guess, divided the effort of submission writing amongst the different bills, but in essence, the DCC submissions should be read collectively. In terms of the second question, it's difficult to speak for the government's intent, but I think that the theory, as I understand it, is that they're trying to remove the impediments to growth as they see them. And so the first impediment being planning regulation and the second impediment being infrastructure funding. So these are 2 solutions to the problem as they see them, and they don't see it as, and there's definitely no policy agenda around compact cities or centralization or anything like that is not amongst the government's stated agendas. I think they just are trying to remove hurdles. And this, the reason why there's definitely some positive statements in this submission is removing hurdles is a good thing. It's just removing them in a way that doesn't have unintended consequences or other issues that they haven't maybe thought through. And that's what we're really trying to focus their mind on is trying to avoid those unintended consequences while still supporting the general direction of travel. But it is really challenging for Dunedin because I don't think they think about places like Waitati or Allenton or these smaller settlements. I do think in their mind they are seeing this through the lens of the larger cities that they're more familiar with in terms of the growth pressures. And so I think they have missed some unintended consequences that are likely to arise for smaller places like Dunedin.
Sorry, so one of those unintended consequences could be Middlemarch becoming a ghost town, for instance.
I think the more likely scenario is that there's pressure to expand settlements or add infrastructure servicing to settlements that don't currently have them, where there's never going to be the rate of growth to make that cost effective. Because you really need to warrant a big infrastructure spend, you want to get a big benefit in terms of growth. And some of these settlements, the timeline, the rate of growth for them would be so slow, you'd never collect the money in time to pay for the investment. And that's why, economically, a compact city makes sense because you get a lot of growth for your investment. And so some of our submission talks about that and having the ability to apply these overlays to truly cost these areas where you may spend millions of dollars and only get, 5 houses a year, a really slow rate of growth. And from a city efficiency point of view, it is better to have your spending where there's higher growth so you get a bang for your buck, basically.
Sorry, and just the last one. To tease that out further, I noticed in paragraph 4 that you stated that the cost of delivering rural water schemes 4.5 times the cost of an urban scheme, and the cost of rural wastewater schemes 7.5 times the cost. Is the council then leaning towards recovering that cost in total, and then is there another risk that living in Waitati or Middlemarch or Allenton becomes the domain of the rich and privileged as opposed to the types of communities that are living there now?
Through the chair, I'll take that from Councillor Sims. Back to Dr. Johnson's earlier point, around, you need to look at all of the submissions in totality. There's a parallel here in terms of also when we segment our submission on a particular bill, we endeavour to link it to the other pieces that are currently in play. But when you look at it in isolation, you might not get the fullness of all the points we wish to raise. And so then, again, that's echoed in terms of how the infrastructure plays out in the individual communities. Clearly for council, we want to make sure that we play an even hand to all of our communities, and we don't see that skewing, that it's inexpensive because it's small, doesn't have scale, it's therefore expensive. So this is the balance we endeavour to achieve. That could be one of the outworkings of this, and that's what we need to be mindful of. But we see the government hasn't signalled that as its intent. That's not what we're seeing. It's just how it's playing out in the endeavour to remove those hurdles, as Dr. Johnson said. So if that needs to be reframed, we can capture that, but we think we've captured enough in terms of the submission on the particular bill. If there's an opportunity to speak at any select hearing opportunity, we can more effectively emphasise those concerns.
Sorry if I might just like to jump in, just to make it clear that so this act, it's essentially a financing tool, that is providing financing off council's balance sheet. So it'll basically be funded, using private capital through a special purpose vehicle. So I'd just like to make that known. Thank you.
So I've got councillors Lund, Hall, Lucas, Vendis. Councillor Lund.
Just following on from Councillor Sims's comments and Mr Ward's response, you're saying here in paragraph 17, that effectively you're basically saying that you want the ability to cross-subsidise smaller townships within the rating base, because it says that the DCC observes that smaller rural townships outside the main urban area can face very high per property servicing costs, and that full pass-through may become prohibitive and effectively prevent development. So isn't that true then, that we are saying that these small towns face enormous costs and we're going to subsidise them, the wider ratepayers? Paragraph 17, page 22.
Yeah, well, that, thank you, Councillor Lund. That certainly recognises that discussion point.
My second question is that, do you think that the government is going to, take a charitable attitude towards the attitude of this submission, which basically says we don't trust developers, we don't trust the people that are going to provide the growth, because you say at page 21 that where infrastructure, this exposure in relation to defective assets, well, not your words, where the infrastructure was not designed to consistent standards, where the quality assurance is incomplete, or where the responsibilities for renewal or long-term performance are ambiguous. And all throughout the submission, there's this mistrust of developers. Now, don't you think that A, that's in opposition to what the government's trying to achieve, and B, don't you think that developers reading this, Dunedin already has problems amongst the development community, that they're simply going to go elsewhere?
I think this submission is just recognising situations that have occurred in the past. I don't think it's trying to say that this is going to happen all the time, or it's a trust issue. It's in most cases developers use the best advice they get from their expert consultants, and I don't think they ever intentionally seek to create infrastructure that is not going to work properly. I don't think that there's ever an ill intent there, but sometimes there have definitely been evidence of infrastructure that has gone in that has later caused problems, and I don't know that I want to call out any particular areas, but then council sometimes inherits assets or systems that then don't perform adequately and then has to address the issues that are caused. So I suppose it's just recognizing that that sometimes happens rather than at all implying that that's ever done purposefully on behalf of anyone.
But surely that's not needed, because at paragraph 14 you actually state that the DCC denotes the importance of ensuring councils have a practical role in confirming infrastructure standards, and that asset acceptance and vesting is linked to enforceable and quality criteria. So that's your key role, to make sure it's fit for purpose. And so, having the submission say that we've got, and you've just said that it's not an issue, but yet it's front and centre in the submission.
Thank you, Councillor. I guess what we're trying to say here is that we want to ensure that we still have a role to play in terms of, endorsing this infrastructure, and that it's not, overstepping or skipping our role.
But it's giving you the power in paragraph 11 to decline proposals that impose disproportionate or inefficient servicing costs, and those will be purely at your discretion. Those two words, isn't that true?
And I think just by way of example of current practice within DCC, so large parts of the city are subject to wastewater constraints, primarily due to ingress into the wastewater system. And so often developers might come along and they say, well, we'll install a detention tank to hold the wastewater. And council has a bar it's set as to how many units that development must provide before it will consider that, because there's a cost to council to monitor and operate and ensure that system doesn't fail and cause an increase in wastewater overflow into streams, and essentially ensure that we can meet our consent conditions. Now, there's that set at the moment at sort of 50 units, because at 50 units, the benefit to the city of getting that new housing is seen as outweighing the additional costs of operating that infrastructure. But what we're trying to say is we wouldn't want it to be that somebody could come along with a 2-3 lot housing proposal and say that we're going to put these things in, and then council all of a sudden has lots of these. So we're just trying to maintain our ability to weigh the costs and the benefits of development that requires more expensive infrastructure to operate for the city. So I think that's all it's saying.
If I may please add, Councillor London through the chair, the intended tone in the submission is one of support for the government's position, support in that the intent to enable growth within this city and the region in a balanced way between public and private endeavours, but it's also reflective of what has occurred here and elsewhere in the country, and just paint an honest picture. It's not meant to be skewed towards public is better than private. It's not meant to be framed that way, but it's just meant to be an honest critique of where we find ourselves, but generally with the positive nature of support for the government's position on this particular funding aspect.
I've got Councillor Hall, Lucas, Vandervis and Mayhem. Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Your Worship. My question comes from page 14, paragraph 15. What safeguards would prevent privately delivered infrastructure from becoming long-term liabilities for the council once it's integrated into the network?
So can you just repeat the question now that we found the paragraph that you're referring to? So usually when we do, when there's a proposal, we negotiate with the developer as to the the infrastructure changes, which are solely to do with their development, which they generally pay for, which have a public and private benefit, where we have to come to some agreement on how DCC will cover the public benefit, and we'll enter into a private development agreement. Sometimes DCC does the infrastructure, sometimes the developer. If the developer does the infrastructure, usually we have some oversight of the contract just to ensure that it's delivered to us in good condition. So we definitely have systems in place to work through all those issues with developers. And I think in general, they work well. I think what we're trying to emphasize is to not take away what is currently an important part of the system, which is working through those issues with developers and ensuring that DCC has enough oversight to get that good outcome. I mean, we definitely don't want to stand in the road of development. We just want to ensure that with these new mechanisms that we still get those same outcomes of being able to have oversight of the infrastructure and work through those funding issues.
So maintenance in going forward have been put on the annual plan, so it's all calculated out.
Yeah, I guess once we get those assets, we have to manage them, right? So, there's cost operating them.
Deputy Mayor Lucas?
Thank you. I'm referring to paragraph 8 on page 20, and I appreciate your earlier comment, Dr. Johnson, about reading all the submissions is like in a package. So I guess my issue is if there's, down the track, there's greenfields development that's, if all other changes, that are proposed in terms of in the RMA space. So if there's greenfields development, effectively this new development is going to leapfrog anything that we've already got in our water plan, and then as council we're going to have to move this project up to connect with it and all of those things and to maintain it. So do we address those kind of issues? I'm just concerned, down the track, if everything comes into play, or am I misreading this?
Well, and if I may, Deputy Mayor Lucas, I'll answer that in a roundabout way, forgive me, from the outset. So, to paint a picture, if there's a remote development,
Yes.
That might be best serviced by a pump system. So, because the pipes would be shallow, there would be pump stations that would convey the flow, wastewater out, storm water in. Whereas in a traditional system, you might connect that if it was adjacent to an existing settlement, it might be via a gravity system, which would mean the pipes would be typically deeper in the ground and maybe more expensive to install. The gravity system has less of a maintenance component, whereas the pump systems have more of a maintenance component. So that's an illustration of what we're trying to describe in terms of the maintenance legacy. But you're right, it might make it more economically attractive to develop on the fringe areas, which is along the lines of what Councillor Sims was inquiring before. So that's the maybe the perverse outworkings of this, because those areas are economically attractive, and then you end up with this, I say ill-planned, forgive me if that's not the appropriate way to frame it, but to Dr. Johnson's point, you wouldn't plan your infrastructure in that way, in that coherent way. Yeah. So that's the fragmentation that comes about as a result of this. For those people living in those communities, it might be a fantastic experience, and it might be then bring in other developments that then concatenate with that towards the more settled centres. So you could have that progressive growth, but that's not planned. That's whatever the development community thinks is attractive to them as a commercial proposition.
That's helpful, thank you. And if I can just ask, how is it anticipated that this will actually work in practice? Because if we talk about right at the beginning and on page 13, on paragraph 6, where we talk about that this Act is proposed to finance up front and then recover over time through levies on the properties that benefit. So we're doing the levies. So if it's a development, so the calculation, so say if it's a for, I don't know, say 50 lot subdivision, but it only is going to be over time. So how is the levies going to be calculated? Because, you know, only 5 houses are built this year and 5 the next year. And I'm just kind of like the mechanics of it.
Thank you for the question. Yes, so it's still a really, to use this act, it's still a really involved process. It basically starts with someone making a proposal for some infrastructure. And it's quite an involved process, you know, working with obviously developers. It could be council-led, it could be developer-led, it could be, you know, NZTA, Waka Kotahi-led. And they'll have a proposal, they want to build this infrastructure, and then there's a very involved process working with the National Infrastructure Funding and Financing Group, and through there we tease out all those details. So from there, you know, you have to determine, well, basically what it's going to cost, who the beneficiaries are, and from there, I guess, you'll calculate the levies. It should be known, you know, we haven't used this before, so, you know, we're not familiar with this process, but as a tool, as a financing tool, it's an option, and it's all off council balance sheet, and yeah, so, but what I'm trying to say is there's a really involved process to tease all those details out, and many hurdles to jump through, and that's probably one of the issues why it hasn't been used as much previously, is because there's a lot of hoops to jump through. And it, yeah, so they've tried to streamline that a little bit and just broaden the eligibility and make it more attractive.
Councillor Van der Vis.
Looking at page 19, 3, where you say we're concerned that a planning system focused on enabling responsiveness will likely result in urban expansion in locations where infrastructure cannot be efficiently provided. I'm disappointed that in this whole submission there is no mention of a lot of the new technology developments that allow for off-grid power, water and wastewater. Why is it that you say that infrastructure cannot be efficiently provided when there's a lot of modern technology that allows for off-grid electrical, solar, modern gravity wastewater modules, and if you look at the rainwater first flush diversion and UV units these days, all of these things can be economically provided, and there are already thousands of places using them, not recognised in this submission. My concern is that you're talking about the costs to the ratepayer when you don't recognise that it would actually be a great plus to the ratepayer to have a lot of these off-grid developments that don't require any extension of the systems at all. So why do we not have any modern technology off-grid recognition and the developments available with them in this submission?
Well, I'll give one answer. So I think this submission is primarily about the new funding and financing tools rather than the technology available. And completely take your point, but really what we were focused on is, you know, urban environments and our thoughts in terms of that one sentence, rather than sort of low density or rural residential living, which of course can take advantage of those things. What we're interested in is how do we plan for and service urban environments. So that's sort of denser environments where sort of on-site systems typically are less good in terms of the general public wanting that as the level of service that they're given. And you know, for example, we have places like Waitati which are not serviced for wastewater that, you know, at one point in time that probably made a lot of sense, but then as you get more and more development, you pass a point in which the community widely agrees that that's the best approach for wastewater management in a sensitive environment. And then there becomes a point where there's pressure on council to put servicing in. And I think that's the type of already urban or urbanizing environment that we had front of mind when we talked about this.
Does that not come to Councillor Lunn's point, though, and that is that if people in Waitati want to have a centralised wastewater treatment plant, they should pay for it. Similarly, this provision of water, drinking water, isn't the problem that the DCC wants to raise standards and then wants to subsidise, heavily subsidise, in the case of places like Waitati, Karitani, whatever? Isn't it the case that it's the DCC's agreeing to these kind of pressures? We've always got pressures, but isn't it the problem that we actually agree to these pressures and then subsidise them that is the issue?
Well, I think the issue is a little bit that, in my mind as a planner, the issue is the incremental nature of change in those types of environments. And because the development levies are focused on charging new development. And so in a situation like Waitati, where the growth rate might be relatively low, the beneficiaries, if we were to reticulate, the vast bulk of the beneficiaries would be existing residents, not the new developers. And so these tools that are geared toward just charging new development don't deal well with those types of situations. And that's sort of goes to the point of the danger of incrementalism, is because you get to a tipping point where you do need to do something different in terms of your infrastructure. And then this way of charging is only charging the new people coming in and not spreading the cost across everyone that's already living there. So from a planning perspective, you're better off to have an overall outcome that you're working towards and then charge everyone from the start. So you're better to have a planned system before you start growing so that all the growth pays for that as it comes in, rather than waiting till you get the house that breaks the camel's back and that you have to do something. And I think that's the challenge with some of these areas that are densifying, that are reliant on on-site wastewater, is the environmental capacity to absorb that is getting to a tipping point.
Councillor Mayhem, Ong and Lund. Councillor Mayhem.
It would be remiss of me not to mention Waitati right now. So development's not something that Waitati might choose, it's something that's being done to the community. So developers have options. I believe that the Waitati development was fought through the Environment Court, and that the developer is planning to put in all their own infrastructure around sewerage and reticulation. There's going to be a private, and I assume the people buying into that development will be paying for that. So in that case, is there a connection at all to the public network? Would there be a cost to the ratepayers? Does that trigger the developer's levy if they've paid for all of the infrastructure?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, in terms of the levy, it wouldn't apply in this case. The levy applies specifically for a set of infrastructure that's being built. So, but yeah, in theory, there could be a scenario where a developer in Waitati could make a proposal to use its levy to fund additional infrastructure.
But that would be unlikely because we don't have reticulated sewerage, or, would it trigger reticulation for the whole community?
Yes, sir, I'm not sure I can answer that.
I think that the submission's on the Infrastructure Funding and Finance Act Amendment Bill, so I think this is probably more of an infrastructure question that's being asked right now.
And what I observe in terms of the questions being presented and the discussion arising from the questions is very much the picture we're trying to paint at the outset. The Funding and Financing Act Amendment Bill is very much centred around how can we overcome the hurdles associated with not having the initial capital to create those assets. What we're hearing from the questioners is very much how it then plays out and the multiple scenarios in which you can immediately imagine the complexity of this. So we've then circled all the way back round to how do we respond to this particular bill in our submission. But it's very much what you've the questions that have been posed is what we've been grappling with in terms of how do we frame this in relation to the bill in isolation. But the conversations have really highlighted the complexity of all the moving parts, and as I say, the multiple scenarios you can immediately imagine as to how this would play out cleanly or in a complicated way.
I've got Councillor Ong, then Councillor Lund. Councillor Ong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I appreciate that you are presenting a very financially innovative approach now on the presenting of public-private partnership and also the SPV structure that you're looking at both at the present and going forward. How do you see now, at the Crown level, we have the benefit of the implicit financial support for our council in terms of our credit rating. And on that sovereign Crown rating, that goes back to one of the highest credit ratings in the world. We have a AAA rating by one credit rating agency, which represents a very low cost of funding because we have fiscal conservatism for our country. So how do you see that translating in terms of that SPV structure and the funding we need going forward for these developments to accelerate them taking place and to ensure that we have a lower cost to our ratepayer? Because when we have lower interest costs to these developments that we can benefit from, that takes away the burden from our ratepayers. At the same time, if we are having an SPV which is majority or which is led by council, how do you support the private developers and the private businesses that are working together with council in that development? Because potentially they can also benefit from that implicit support from council when they go out to lenders.
Can you just please get to the question, because it's more like a speech. Can you please get to the question?
It's not. I'm asking several questions
yes,
here.
well, could you please ask one question at a time quite clearly?
I believe you understand the question, though. The questions, if it may be one question, it may be two questions. I think that's kind of all.
Are you going to get the stage?
So there's that opportunity you've presented. How do you see that in terms of us supporting our businesses that will be working together with council on these developments and enabling to have that lower cost of funding as well? Because at the council side of our credit rating, we are benefiting from our Crown credit rating, and that translates across our city and across our council, and possibly
Councillor Ong, I've asked you to get to the question, please. This is
No, I want them to understand.
I don't know that this
I believe you understand my question. I'll just leave it at that.
I think that Mr. Ward's going to answer.
Thank you, Councillor Ong. As Mr. Gnomes said earlier, this relates to a financing structure that is off council's balance sheet, and therefore on that basis I think that addresses that concern around the debt burden to council and the net overall position that we face. So it's positively supported by council, and hopefully that's adequately reflected in the submission. We see that as a good thing. All we've since debated is some of the complexities arising from this, but in answer to your question, we see that as a good thing, and therefore that lower debt burden has a direct line of sight to the amount of rates that we require to fund that debt.
Councillor Lund.
Just going back to Councillor Lucas's example and Mr. Ward's response, and it was illuminating just around the, for example, the pumped, problem versus a gravity pipe problem. Now, surely we're saying that the cost is orders of magnitude higher, 7.5 times higher, on average for rural wastewater schemes. But my experience in a recent project in Nelson with exactly this issue is where we were doing around 40 or 50 units in total, and there were infrastructure problems because we had to do exactly that. We had to pump the wastewater 500-600 metres to the point of connection to the to the closest, and that was a cost that was borne by the developer. The pump station had to be bought, the cost to the developer. The maintenance, the ongoing maintenance was all, none of that was a council cost. Surely, is the submission accurate when it says that the cost for these types of, infrastructure concerns are this high?
From a cost point of view, I would say yes, in terms of who services that cost, where does the cost sit. I think that's a secondary question. But in terms of the installation cost, that's all we're trying to address and frame here.
I would like the submission, just going further to Councillor Vandervis's points, is that there doesn't seem to be any acknowledgement that, for example, what's happening in the Queenstown Lakes district, where there are a number of developments, larger scale ones, where they're providing all their own infrastructure, I understand. And so if that were acknowledged, then there would be, it would remove a lot of risk to the council. And for example, we already do that in Dunedin. The Mission Cove subdivision is all, the roading and infrastructure is not council road, it's all private roads, and a number of other examples, I'm sure, as well.
May I reply? Thank you, through the chair. Points well made, Councillor Lund. The submission is very much around the structures required for funding, what infrastructure is required, the ownership and the subsequent use of that infrastructure see as a separate matter. This is, again, there's a broad discussion, but we're constrained around what is our response to the funding mechanisms that are laid out. But again, that layering in terms of what infrastructure is required, who owns it, who operates it, who runs it, are secondary to the points made in the submission.
Councillor Mayhem.
This is a question for you, Koromātua Sophie. We discussed yesterday that questions shouldn't take more than 1 minute. I wondered if we needed to start using the timer so that to avoid going into speeches.
Thank you, Councillor Mayhem. That is taken on board. Are there any other questions? Councillor Ong.
Yes, I'm just coming back to the response, and I appreciate the off-balance sheet perspective you're highlighting. It's not going to affect our existing debt levels of the group. Is that correct, firstly? And then secondly, I would appreciate that you can share with us further on how this is not going to put on the burden potentially for ratepayers. And will you be engaging with our city's banks and financial institutions presently in the funding of financially innovative debt structures for these developments, where we are both supporting the joint venture partners and our community in funding that?
Thank you, Councillor Ong. I think that was answered before. Do we have any other questions? Shall we move into moving the resolution? Would anyone like to move the resolution? Thank you. You would like to move it? Seconded, Councillor Fiso.
Firstly, tēnā koe o worship and tēnā koutou. Thanks very much to staff for developing this submission. I do agree with Councillor Sims that it's a really equitable and I think well-worded response. It accepts what we see as the benefits, and it also, I think my reading of it, significantly addresses the concerns where these changes to legislation might negatively impact our ratepayers by taking a sort of whole law system approach. And the amount of understanding that's required to actually pour through these multiple bills and do the submission to this particular bill is really laudable. Again, I'd like to reiterate that I think this does a good job of achieving our concerns where ratepayers might be impacted, so it's wonderful in that perspective. And it sort of addresses like the important distinction between maintenance that's paid for by a council and maintenance that might be paid for by a private provider An important distinction here is that a private provider can go bankrupt, but it's still incumbent on us to provide those services. And so I think those kind of concerns are well captured. So I'm very happy to move the motion that we accept this excellent report. Ka mihi.
Thank you. Councillors Weatherall, then Vanderbilt.
Thank you, Ms Sophie. Good submission. I like that the beneficiaries of new growth have to pay for the privilege, and anything to alleviate ratepayers having to subsidise shortfalls is a good thing. Yet, a one-size-fits-all system could have costly ramifications which may make development unviable for smaller rural communities and challenging areas where there is no convenient infrastructure already existing. As I see it, this submission encourages growth being steered towards places that will already have infrastructure of pipes and roads nearby, and does not encourage development on cheap land where it will be cost prohibitive to install and maintain services. Measured growth is good. Out of control, unviable growth will only bite ratepayers on the backside in the long run. So thank you, staff. The 9 amendments read really well. They are all about protecting our ratepayers and our council from having to carry long-term financial risk for future growth. I can't grizzle. Well done. Thank you.
Councillor Vanderbilt.
I don't agree that the 9 amendments protect our ratepayers. I believe that most of the amendments here and the thrust of this submission is to maintain the power and control of our planning department, and to not actually allow a lot of new development that with new technology would have no upfront costs for the ratepayer at all. Councillor Lund has referred to new developments that are quite large ones, some of them, that have basically provide all of their own development. And these, in terms of infrastructure, except perhaps for road access, around Dunedin in particular, there are literally thousands of homes now that are off-grid. I have one 15 minutes north of the Octagon. We produce our own solar power. We have a modern wastewater treatment module system which has been designed and specified by the DCC, and we've paid the designers and the specifiers for that, but built it ourselves and paid for it ourselves. And the rainwater first flush division and UV systems mean that we don't need connection to water either. So, and this is our place, but the property next door, again, has the same thing. So these are homes where people are living, where there is no cost to the DCC, and yet we still end up paying rates. Much smaller rates because obviously we don't have the water targeted rate, and these new technology and private provision examples are some that I think we should have a whole lot more of. They should have they should allow people to build where they want and have systems of their own if they want. And that this submission here simply doesn't recognise any of that at all. The submission talks about future unintended consequences of these kind of developments. But as I see it, given that you still have to get any of these infrastructure systems certified by the DCC, in the case of sewage, and I completely agree, should be designed also by the DCC. Being provided privately actually saves the ratepayer a whole lot of money. So the claim that this submission is really focused on growth within the city
I take to mean within the urban boundaries, well, that's all well and good. But the real potential, I think, is for further growth outside of the city, where people can be free to have their own systems and actually save the ratepayer a whole lot of money by providing things themselves. The issue about the extraordinary cost of having the DCC build systems for places like Waitati, which have already agreed to be low growth, I don't think we should be looking at doing that. Waitati is low growth. A lot of people in Waitati are happy for it to remain low growth. Why should the DCC start providing systems for villages outside of the Dunedin urban area, which, if the DCC does it, will have enormous cost, 7 times in the case of, as mentioned in the report. Why don't we simply not do those things? And if people in these outlying villages or in outlying properties for their own purposes, let them provide their own infrastructure, and in this way overcome the hurdles of upfront cost, which Mr. Ward has talked about, and you get round the unintended consequences by making sure that all of these new bits of infrastructure actually meet DCC requirements. So I'm not going to vote for this because I think it's essentially backward looking. It doesn't recognise that what the government is doing is trying to free up development and recognise that private individuals can, in many cases, do things much more efficiently than centralised government.
We're out of time. I've got Councillor Chambers, Mayhem, Hall. Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, I'll be supporting the submission. I think it was good to hear the answers from the officials today. Obviously, I had that problem with the tick box thing, but that's not the submission itself. That's just a general evaluation of the submission. The problem for myself, something like myself, reading both the bill and the submission, is the jargon and the use of the word infrastructure, which gives me antibodies. There's something about the word infrastructure, and what does that mean? And I think infrastructure means power, water, sewage, and roading. But power is looked after by Aurora, so that's not part of this thing. And Three Waters gets a fair mention in the submission. But I really like paragraph 16 of the submission, page 22, because it's the only mention of the word roading in the whole submission. And yet I think this is all about roads, I think, in the main. Because the Three Waters covers to some extent the sewage and the water, but the roading is the real problem for the council, isn't it? Delivering roads to those new subdivisions or new developments, and should the roads be sealed or unsealed, all that sort of stuff. It costs a fortune, and it was interesting also to hear that comment that the unintended consequences of if the developer in this growth for growth funding package pays all the money, then it's the other residents are gaining from to some extent, but they won't cover the roads going up to the subdivision. I don't think so. It's complicated, but I think I suppose I'm sort of desperately arguing for more plain English in these sort of documents, but I think the submission addresses the difficulties that the bill may cause for councils.
Thank you, Councillor Mayhem.
Thank you, Koromatua Sophie. Ka mihi Ms Johnson and the team. The tone of submission is in general of support, and it's working towards oversight of our infrastructure and network affordability. There's a lot of pressure to expand settlements and add infrastructure. Big spend requires big growth, we've heard. It makes more sense economically to have a compact city. Certainly that's what I would be voting for, more inner city development, inner city living, and the infrastructure is already there, not just our water networks and roading, but also connectivity to buses, schools, that wonderful 10-minute city commute that we can boast makes our city so wonderfully livable. So for me, this makes a lot of sense. The overlays are checking the actual costs, and city efficiency is looking for bang for buck. The council wants to be even and fair to all of our communities, and as Mr Ward said, mindful of the outworkings with endeavouring to remove hurdles for developers. And I also pointed out that developers do have options. There's negotiations around infrastructure, and in those smaller communities, the developer can wear all of the costs and, you know, install infrastructure themselves if that is the wish. And I know many developers elevate this to the Environment Court or other mechanisms in order to get their developments through. So I think this is a good safeguarding exercise, this policy and the Act, and also allowing developers to, you know, fast track their developments too. Thank you.
Councillor Hall, then Sims, Walker on. Councillor Hall. It's you.
Thank you, Your Worship. I support the intent behind the submission, particularly the principles of growth should pay for growth. The principle matters for Dunedin, especially given the scale of the three water challenges and the long-term cost pressures we already face. What I want to emphasise is the importance of infrastructure efficiency and sequencing. If the national settings prioritise speed and responsiveness without a strong safeguard, there is a real risk that development is pushed into locations that are expensive to service and difficult to integrate into the existing network. Over that time, that can undermine affordability and shift costs onto ratepayers. I'm pleased the submission is clear about the need for a whole-of-life cost assessment and a strong council oversight before privately delivered infrastructure becomes part of the public network. These protections are critical if these tools to work as intended. Overall, the submission strikes a right balance between enabling growth and protecting long-term public value, and I'm comfortable supporting it.
Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie, and I suspect we have fallen into the trap of debating the next submission rather than the current submission. But having said that, they are intertwined, and I think it's been incredibly useful. I will be supporting the submission, but I'm going to signal a significant warning to the council. Off-balance sheet does not mean we don't have to pay the money back, and in fact it is a mechanism to increase debt without the increased load being obvious to somebody reading the balance sheet, or in fact and could also be seen to be a mechanism to avoid imposed debt to income ratios. So I do agree with the intent of what the government is doing here, and that is that access to finance to allow infrastructure to facilitate growth and to stay ahead of growth within our city is on balance a positive thing. But I am triggered by the term off-balance sheet because of what that can mean in the future, and I think that we need to consider that. Having said that, I think it's on balance, a positive thing for us and for our ability as a city to take advantage of growth. So I'll be supporting it.
Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Ms Sophie. And Councillor Chambers, I'm relieved that the word infrastructure gives someone else around this table a particular reaction. Used to just be me. Thanks, obviously, to staff for the stellar work on these submissions today. RNZ this morning, for those who listened, had a really interesting article on the jigsaw competition at the Masters Games that's going on at the moment. And it appears from these submissions that and the one coming to full council, that staff at the moment have the unenviable task of trying to put a jigsaw together with a lot of missing bits, rather you than me. That said, well done for putting these excellent submissions together, but no thanks for re-traumatising me in terms of work I did with Councillor O'Malley and Dr Johnson around Variation 2, and work on the national policy statement on for urban development. Also, Dr. Johnson, I think the comment, I wrote it down here, the house that breaks the camel's back has to take probably leads the competition for comment of the year so far. Excellent, I'll probably use it again. Listen, the excellent submission rightly highlights some obvious concerns, and many of you have obviously read about them or mentioned them in questions. In simple terms, as the submission says, the principles of managed growth, infrastructure efficiency and long-term affordability are at risk under the current bills of being undermined, I believe. And thankfully the submission highlights that. It also highlights that a planning and financing environment that places undue emphasis on short-term responsiveness creates a high and strong potential likelihood that growth will be pushed into locations, as many people have mentioned, that are costly, inefficient and unsustainable to service. I guess that's not an outcome we should be overly supportive of, I believe. Why? Because this has obvious risks for Three Waters that we hear often. We know the pressures financially accruing to us around Three Waters. So this has obvious risks for our Three Waters networks by obviously just creating longer term operating and maintenance costs, and I guess embedding inefficiencies that are likely to persist well into the future, that benefits nobody, particularly our ratepayers, and we need to be concerned for them. So taken together, the effect of these decisions are going to have the potential to place sustained upward pressure on rates and significantly undermine housing affordability for current and future communities. Therefore, I commend and fully support this submission, and again want to just thank the staff for working on it. Thanks.
Councillor Ong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I fully support this submission, and I see it as representing a very financially innovative approach. It's very well financially thought through. The submission is written very well in plain English. I only had to read it once, not 24 times, to understand it. And I believe that this is representing the opportunity forward, not just in the SPV specific developments for our infrastructure and economic development, but it also represents the opportunity that we have to look at more broadly on the council level and across our different council entities in terms of how we ensure we are not changing our existing debt levels. And it's very good that you think about, as you've presented, the off-balance sheet way of doing that. At the same time, it's also allowing us to tap on possibly financially very innovative approaches to how we reduce or ensure we're not changing the amount of interest costs and interest burden that we are paying, and that will translate into managing our rates and ensuring that we can meet rate cap requirements and possibly be even more innovative beyond that in terms of looking at how our rates are unchanged. So I think this is a very good approach here, and it represents a more broader opportunity that we have, because we have the financial implicit support of our Crown's sovereign rating, that as a council and city we benefit from, and at the same time we are able to tap on for the SPVs that are being looked at, and also going forward for those businesses that may partner together with council, because if council is taking the lead on these projects, then at the same time we can also look at how we can support those partners that are working together in these projects with us in order to accelerate the infrastructure, the development projects, and the community solutions that we all need. So I think this is a very good approach, and I fully support it.
Thank you. I'll just make a couple of comments. I will support the submission. I just want to thank the team for navigating the number of submissions that you have early in the year, because there are a huge amount of them. I thought it was a great explanation of the pros and cons, and I really appreciated the recommendation boxes, which made it quite easy to read. I think the analogy of a jigsaw was brought up, and we do have I think the complexity of moving parts with a number of submissions, and when we are talking about reading them as a whole, we're not reading them as a whole today, we're reading 3, and there are more to come, including the rates caps and the simplifying local government. So it is quite hard to see these as a whole and not as bits, but I think this one, the submission is good. At the conclusion, I think, clarifies it quite easily or specifically, which says it concentrates on our position centres on managed growth, so it's very important for us as a city to manage our growth, infrastructure efficiency and long-term affordability. And then it just talks about the planning and financing environment that prioritises responsiveness can push growth into costly to service locations, fragment three waters networks and increase long run operating and maintenance costs with sustained impacts for rates and housing affordability. And that's really key to our concerns, is that if we end up with the the unintended consequences of ratepayers subsidising some of this operating costs, and it actually impacts on our rates, especially when we're looking at a rates cap environment. That would be a worry for us. But we also do need to have control about where our city is growing and the efficiency of that as well. It's better to have a planned system for growth, not a hodgepodge. So did anyone else wish to speak before we go to the right of reply? So Councillor Treadwell, your right of reply.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, and tēnā koutou. I'll just quickly address these responses. Councillor Weatherall very well articulated that out of control, unviable growth will only bite ratepayers, and I agree that the submission provides very little to grizzle about. I appreciate Councillor Vandervis' considerations of advancing technology, but I think the key word around infrastructure delivery here is efficient, and while I hope we can better facilitate these alternative ways of living in future, I think the bill speaks well, or the submission speaks well, to the delivery of services that our constituents currently expect from us. Councillor Chambers, ka mihi for your insight about roads, and I agree completely, and a good call on the importance of plain language in these. Councillor Mayhem, excellent point about the connectivity of our city being an appealing part of living here, and I appreciate your consistent and enthusiastic advocacy for the community of Waitari. Councillor Hall, very good call about infrastructure efficiency. It is my understanding that this is a guiding principle for Mr. Ward and his team, and a concern that's well laid out by staff in the submission today. Councillor Sims, also a very good call about the appealing but sometimes misleading terminology of off-balance sheet finances, and I certainly hear you there and appreciate your caution. Councillor Walker, great jigsaw analogy, and I hope today's meeting doesn't provide additional re-traumatising incidents for you. Councillor Ong, very good points, and I'm glad to hear your support for this submission. And Mayor Sophie, as always, thanks for providing insights from your wide perspective on this. I appreciate that these pieces of legislation and submissions have been a big part of your life recently, so ka mihi, and thanks again to staff for the excellent submission.
I'm going to put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Against?
No, recorded, please.
Yeah, recorded.
You've got that. Okay, I just want to, we did receive an apology from Councillor Gary, so I'll move that we accept the apology from Councillor Gary, seconded Deputy Mayor Lucas. All those in favour, aye. Anyone against? That is carried. So we'll move on to item 7, the DCC submission on the local government infrastructure funding amendment bill, and welcome the team back to the table. Do you have any opening comments? You're happy just to take questions?
Happy just to take questions. They're so closely worded. I messed up my papers and I was just trying to untangle them. Sorry.
Very
ready
welcome to take a moment because I think there's a lot of papers. I've got Councillor Hall and Deputy Mayor Lucas, Lund and Sims.
So page 25, paragraph 7, the report acknowledges the old system relied on predictable growth, but the new planning environment allows for development to occur almost anywhere at any time. How does the council expect to plan infrastructure proactively under this model rather than being forced into reactive decision making?
I can answer that. I think that's one of the challenges of the package overall is we're really going to have to change the way we operate to be more able to be responsive. So in terms of practical steps that council's taking in that space is we're working quite closely with our infrastructure teams. We already have a housing capacity model and we're refreshing that to be ready and primed, and we also have tools that we use to try to model and predict where growth is going to occur. We try to have open channels to developers and for the greenfield and other areas that we have to try to understand the timing of when some of those things are going to come on stream. As we enter into the RM reform and we enter into these new plans and the new spatial planning processes, we will get new ideas and thoughts. We know what has been suggested in the past. We're sort of trying to use that as a guide, but we will have to be ready to rapidly assess the infrastructure impacts of growth proposals and find a way to more quickly than we have in the past assess how the costs of infrastructure and how that cost may be fairly distributed or shared or charged. So yeah, we're doing what we can to prepare, but it will be a much more challenging environment to operate in than we have had in the past.
I wasn't sure how to articulate this question, so I'm just going to say the word salad. Page 30, paragraph 3 to 6. If a developer proposes, for example, 20 new dwellings in an area where existing 3 water infrastructure does not meet the capacity, what ensures that the full cost of the upgrades is on the developer and not on the existing ratepayer? And I'm talking about the service up to the property, not the developer's part of it.
So I think when we get a growth proposal, the infrastructure teams will do an assessment of what infrastructure upgrades may be required. There's infrastructure that's entirely within it. So it's easiest to think about this in greenfield terms, but all the infrastructure inside a site, so the internal roads and footpaths and pipes and whatnot, are usually paid for by the developer. But then there may be a need for footpath extensions. There could be a need for new traffic signals because of increased volumes. The developer will have to do an integrated traffic assessment to determine the impacts on the network. The 3 waters assessments usually done in-house, but they will also have experts that provide advice that work through council. And then we have to go through the process of determining, for those external to the site, what are the private versus public benefits. And this can be really challenging. We have found it challenging in the past where we've had instances where there's a requirement for new roundabout due to essentially the tipping point and a network being reached, but there's already an existing problem and there'll be lots of beneficiaries using that roundabout. So we have to agree how that's going to get paid for, and then we enter into private development agreements. The real challenge with development contributions is they require projects to be in the LTP ahead of time. So it really relies on a plan system. So if that roundabout is determined to be 50% public benefit. We don't have that project in our LTP. We therefore cannot collect development contributions on that project if that developer progresses before we're able to change the development contributions policy. And then we have to enter into a way of how we're going to recoup that money otherwise. So it can be complicated. We're getting better at it because we've had a lot of growth that's come through recently. It'll be interesting switching to this new system, and we will do lots of prep work. But it is a matter of just having your system set up in place to enter into those conversations and ensuring the tools allow you to find a way through them. And that's why we're raising a lot of these concerns, is just to make sure that the tools will work effectively in practice, particularly in Dunedin, where we get small growth. And I guess that's an important thing. In Queenstown, they do developments with thousands of houses in a single development. A lot of our developments are less than 50 homes in a particular greenfield area. So it's a completely different type of scenario. We get very few developments that are, in the hundreds.
Yeah, I'm just worried that we're going to have roads that we're going to have to pay for to be sealed up to developments and stuff like that, and they're going to send an email threatening legal action if we don't do it immediately,
Usually, I think our experiences as most developers, have been actually really good to work with. We develop good relationships. We find a way through. We just need to have the systems in place in council to work through those things and the ability to work through this. A lot of the submissions are addressing is just please don't take away the current ability we have to work with developers to come up with logical solutions.
Can I just jump in and ask a question about you were talking about if projects aren't in the LTP, then we can't charge for them. So does this bill change that ability? Because obviously we only do an LTP every 3 years.
Thank you, Ms. Sophie. Yes, that's the intent of the levy system, is to provide that flexibility. Okay. So it's not directly tied to the LTP, and we're kind of able to use some of those levy revenues, for growth, other growth projects that I guess we're responding to. Because in the planning phase, obviously it's a plan, and often a lot of our growth is reactive. So.
And just there's a question here about, it's on page 31, about it doesn't contain discussion on earlier government proposals regarding the use of targeted rates, and I think that I'm seeing through the all of the submissions, I'm not really seeing the words targeted rates. So should this have been something that was thought about in here?
I think the targeted rates. It was flagged as part of the Going for Housing Growth program that it'd be discussed, but I think the concern is that it hasn't been in some of the legislation.
And then also just down from that said the bill be amended to make it clear that the Crown should not be exempt from development levies. So is the Crown currently paying development contributions if it should do something? Or is this a new thing? Okay, that's... and then it also just talks about if local authorities are wanting to remit development levies, because some local authorities might use that as a tool, and I guess part of the negotiation. So that's something that's not actually in the bill, is it, about how we would go about remitting development levies?
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
Yeah. I'm probably confused about that. I'm really confused about that one as well. So it's paragraph 16, and it just says DCC recommends any local authorities who are wanting to remit development levies must clearly and publicly set up the objectives of remission in their development levies policy, together with the reasons for expecting the ratepayer to meet the cost. So I'd be thinking about if a developer was doing something that actually had perhaps added public benefit, and we wanted to encourage them to do it, would we have the ability to do that, or is that not addressed?
Thank you. Yeah, I think we just want from the development levies regime or legislation that it will explain or give guidance on, you know, what we can provide remission for, just so there's kind of a consistent approach, you know, rather than case by case and us assessing what is reasonable for a remission, you know, because often developers will claim that they're providing, or you know, they're not impacting, you know, there's no additional demand on the network from their development, so they request a remission. So we're just looking for a bit more guidance on, you know, what's allowed.
Yeah, I get that now because we've sat on some rates remission hearings. Thank you. I just needed a little bit of explanation around that. I've got Councillors Lucas, Lund, Sims, Vandervis and Chambers. Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. I've just got one remaining question. It's kind of a follow-up question from Councillor Hall and Mayor Sophie, and it's in terms of the actual practicality in terms of administering the levies as opposed to the DCs. So with the DCs, we know the projects that are in our LTP, we've just redone our DC, so we kind of know what the rates are and all that. So from a developer's perspective, going in, they have a relative idea of how much they're going to have to pay. So under the development levies, it's not so clear at the outset what they're going to have to pay, or it's, you know, it's more, is fluid the right word, or is there more of a calculation?
Yeah, thank you. At this stage, we don't have enough. We're not entirely sure how the growth calculations are going to be worked through.
And I guess that's a concern because, I mean, I know we budgeted the amount of DCs coming in, I mean, and it takes time for them to be paid. So whether that's still going to be the case that the developer doesn't have to pay for them up front, will that still be the case? And so it's still, there's still a lot of questions about the actual day-to-day administration of them.
I'll just make one point that, you know, development contributions can still be used up until 2030. So there is a bit of time in between. We can develop a levies policy and enact it or adopt it by July 28. So yeah, there's still some time to work through that. But yeah, I think DCs will still be there in the interim potentially if we don't have enough detail.
Councillor Lund.
You've stolen my questions, Mayor Sophie.
Sorry.
But, I would like Ms Johnson and the team just to walk me through, like, the notional, you know, how the process will actually work with the development levies on say a 40, you know, Councillor Lucas's 40 unit subdivision. Just can you do that and just explain, you know, we know what we're doing now with the DCs, but just walk me through how it will work.
Thank you, Councillor. At a higher level, we essentially have to assess the growth component of the infrastructure cost. So, you know, we might develop a piece of network, and, you know, to feed growth, some of that cost might be tied with renewal. So it's not all going to be tied to growth. So we have to work out those growth proportions, and then basically allocate based on that growth proportion that cost to growth, which will be recovered via the levies, aggregated across the total number of growth units that we're forecasting. So there's still a forecasting assumption component to our growth, that's obviously fundamental to the levies as well. Same with the current DC.
Right, so someone's come along and said, I want to build a 40-unit subdivision. You go and work out what the growth component of that is, and there's some figure that's arrived that's forecast, right? And then what happens?
So it's worked out in aggregate based on our planning to start with. So it's not development specific. So every development based on their demand that we charge will be charged. Yeah, there'll be a base.
Over an area, correct? So what sort of size area are we talking about? Can you give us some guidance on that?
So the change from DCs to levies is essentially moving to one levy area. So there will be no breakdown of the area benefits that we currently have with the Metro Greenfields and the wider regions.
So does that mean the Tairi and Wakawiti and Waitati, all that will all be just one for the entire urban boundary of Dunedin? There'll be one set levy. Is that correct?
Thank you. Yes, there'll be one base levy, and then there's also these high cost overlays that we can potentially charge if there's an area where we're able to show that there's significantly high growth costs, costs associated with that growth.
Great. Does the team agree with the local government submission where they say that they quote a New South Wales Productivity Commission, and they say that the contributions, because my view is that I think it's going to be more than the development contributions. I mean, I think that's a very reasonable assumption, and obviously local government New Zealand think that. But they say that, some research they've done says that this will not necessarily add to the final price of new housing. Now, I'm not convinced by this, because it seems to me that if this is a cost that every development is paying in a growth area on a levy, it becomes a tax. It becomes a cost, that everybody has to face, and it's simply added to the price. Council have a view on that?
Well, I think one of the issues that we raise is the pressure that collectively the changes may make for growth to go outside of the city, because the land values are much less, it's potentially more profitable, and if the cost of providing new servicing in those areas can be spread across the entire city, you could end up with the subsidization of these areas that become more attractive and more profitable to grow, and in particular areas that don't have the full suite of existing services. So you're not looking at a pump station upgrade or a minor upgrade. You might be looking at needing to install a reticulated system. I think those are the real concerns, is around this cross-subsidization, particularly because the rates of growth there might be relatively slow. And that might be fine for the developer, because it trickles in over time, but especially when the rest of the growth in the city is able to contribute to those costs earlier. And I think that's essentially, in a nutshell, the key theme of the concern that we have. However, we do strongly support the development levies tool as being more flexible than development contributions, and it gets us out from under the problem of when you have a specific piece of infrastructure that needs to be provided that we can't charge for because it's not in the LTP. So it definitely has a good side to it as well. And I think hopefully the government can understand the concerns being raised and ensure that they're addressed in some way.
Thank you. But we are still, you talked about, high growth, high cost, but in paragraph 16 again, it does say that the council recommends that that you can have this effectively cross-subsidisation, because you say to presents a disproportionate cost relative to the price of land, effectively preventing growth in that settlement. So you are leaving that option open for yourself, aren't you?
Yeah, there is definitely a foot in both camps in terms of the outlying settlements, because we do state that we don't want to make an existing settlement unable to have any growth, because there's a lot of growth that may not create a need for a major upgrade to infrastructure, and we don't want to get in the road of that, because outlying settlements need to have some capacity for growth. I think the concern is where the level of growth would tip us over into needing to do major and expensive upgrades or new infrastructure provision, and the amount of growth that you would get would not be worth that investment. So we are saying both things, that we want to be able to subsidize or to ensure that we don't sterilize growth in outlying settlements, but we also want to be able to manage the rate of it and its impact on costs.
Thanks.
Councillor Sims and Councillor Vandervis and Councillor Chambers.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie, and I sort of stole half my question, but I just wanted to, and your Councillor Lund's question and your response to him has confused me, so could I just clarify that the levies would allow, so let's say somebody wanted to do a 650 section subdivision in Mosgiel, and that was going to require, and the council determined that in order to support that, it was going to require a roundabout at a nearby intersection. That allows you to say to that developer, well, it's your developments that's triggered this need for this roundabout. There is going to be some existing benefit for existing residents, so therefore we're going to levy you an amount to pay for that roundabout. Am I misinterpreting that, or is that correct?
So the roundabout's a good example of where this is a good change, because in the roundabout example, you'd agree the portion that's of private benefit and the portion that's of public benefit, which should be paid through the development levies. Under the DCs, if we don't have that roundabout in our LTP, we can't charge for it. So this fixes that situation. So for roundabouts, it's an improvement. So I think generally that's a better situation. I think the problem would be if that 650 lot subdivision was somewhere where, like say in Allenton, where they have no wastewater treatment facility that would allow for 650 houses, and you'd have to put in a massive amount of infrastructure. But the rate of growth in Allenton wouldn't pay for that in a timely way. Then it would not be a good thing. So it's good in some situations and probably not good in others.
Sorry, but where I was trying to get to, so you can apply a levy, specific levy to that subdivision to pay for that.
No, so the developer pays their portion directly. And in fact, usually the developer will install the roundabout. So normally if the development triggers the roundabout, we reached an agreement with the developer. They will often build the roundabout to council specifications, and then we pay our portion. But I don't know how the payment works, so that's a finance question, but that's the nature of the agreement.
Thank you. Sorry. And then, so in paragraph 10, when you talk about targeted rates, are you signalling a desire from the DCC to use targeted rates more than you have in the past? And in saying that, I would note that the Otago Regional Council and other councils within Otago seem to be much more aggressive at using targeted rates than the DCC have been in the past.
No, thanks for the question, but sorry, I don't have a view or an answer to that.
And then just paragraph 11, which is the short paragraph that deals with the Crown should be captured by this. Is it your intention that tertiary institutions should be captured by it? Is that the intent of that paragraph?
Apologies, can you please repeat that? I was just writing a note. I missed the question, sorry.
The Crown having to pay development.
So paragraph 11... Sorry, paragraph 11, as Mayor Sophie alluded, the DCC recommends the draft bill be amended to make it clear that the Crown should not be exempt from development levies. Is the intent of that paragraph to capture the tertiary institutions?
So there's a third contributor to the report who's not at the table. And so when we're looking at each other, it usually means that it's not one of us that wrote that. So certainly the tertiary institutions is Crown land, and there's, that debate has been had in the past about how Crown land contributes to rates and all sorts of things. But I don't think it looks like any of us at the table are across that issue in any great depth.
Through the chair, if I may offer a response, Councillor Sims, I think that is literally a catch-all, because it just recognises that, here the debate is between council and the developer community, and it's just reflective of there are other actors or the other players involved here, and whether it's Ministry of Education and Ministry of Corrections, there are other infrastructure requirements to service those institutions. So I think it's just really is my reading of it is just a reflection of there are other components here.
So yes is the answer, is that?
So, yeah,
yeah.
But not in a targeted way. I just want to emphasise we're not singling out that particular segment or that sector. It is just reflective. The Crown operates very broadly, and through its agencies and its institutions, there will be infrastructure requirements. So it's, again, wanting the provisions of the levies to be even-handed across all contributors.
Councillor Vandervis and Councillor Chambers.
Councillor Sim's question was mine as well, and I don't think we've really had a clear answer to what is, I think, a very significant and important question. Councillor Sims mentioned tertiary institutions, but we've also got schools, we've got hospital, we've got enormous potential for levies being paid. Dunedin has long suffered, actually, by the Act of Parliament which exempts government institutions from paying the general rate. We can have them for targeted rates, but for instance, there was quite a big kerfuffle about the university not making any real contribution to the stadium, because the university gets quite a bit of use out of the stadium. So when it says in 11 that the DCC recommends that the draft bill be amended to make it clear that the Crown should not be exempt from development levies, can you tell us what exactly the bill says currently and how that clarity will bring in the university, the schools? I know there's been some big developments of taking.
Point of order, please, Mayor Sophie. The team here has already answered that. The person who can answer that question is not present. So.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Vandervis. I think that Mr Ward answered that question as well, that this is intended as a catch-all for all Crown properties, and I think Kainga Ora would have been one of those as well. So I think, I'm not quite sure, I was having a quick look through the legislation as what we've got here, the legislation, but I think the point is well made if we include it in our submission, which is currently there.
Sorry, that we include what?
This was a paragraph 11. DCC
Yes.
recommends that the draft bill be amended to make it clear that the Crown should not be exempt from development levies. So that recommendation is already in the submission, and that would cover everything.
So surely we should be able to know at this meeting, despite the absence of one of the contributors, what this very significant, I mean, this is a make or break.
Sorry, we're ruling on the point of order. Please add
sorry.
25 to irrelevance. I'm called a point of order now. We seem to be in some deep discussion.
Yeah, sorry. I'll uphold the point of order because the question had been asked, but I just wonder if you could rephrase the question in another way. Is your question that you want to see the legislation, and then we can take an adjournment to find the legislation, because I don't necessarily know. I see you guys don't necessarily have computers to be able to look up the legislation.
We could look it up or provide it after the meeting.
Do you want to see it now, Councillor Vandervis? Okay.
No, not at all. My question isn't that I want to see the legislation. My question is, what is intended by 11 when it says that it needs to be made clear that the Crown should not be exempt from the development levies? I think this is incredibly important. I think it's a great idea. I agree with it entirely. If it means, as I think as it reads, that the university, the hospital and schools in the future will be subject to levies, I think this is incredibly important for Dunedin, and this is something that makes me want to vote for the whole thing. If it doesn't mean that, then what does it mean?
Thank you. We have found the source. So you have as attachment the Taituara submission. So we did look at this and picked up on points that we thought DCC should support, and that is on page 7 of that submission, and there's a bit more wording around that crossing page 7 to 8, and hopefully that might help provide you with a little bit more information around the argument there.
What is never mind that, it's the submission that we are making. What do we intend for that to mean? Do we intend that 11 means in future university, hospital, schools will all pay development levies. We'll be able to hit them for all of these things. I mean, if that's the case, marvellous, and I'm happy to vote for it.
I think the answer is yes, isn't it? The answer is yes.
That is what that point is asking for, and that is the same point made in this Taitoara submission that we've picked up on.
If I may, please refer you to page 39 of the document, which is towards the bottom of the page. I think that's where we're drawing on that direction from Taitoara and reflecting it in just a very simple sentence.
Okay, I have Councillor Chambers, Lucas, Sims and Councillor Lund. Did I just see you put your hand up? Okay, Councillor Chambers.
Yeah, thank you. Just a question in relation to paragraph 13 on page 31 of our papers. I wasn't sure what the term high cost overlays meant, and I did an internet search last night and it flagged up all this stuff about whether roads should be covered in concrete or asphalt, which really sent me down a rabbit hole. But I gather it's something financial. Could I ask for a bit more explanation? I didn't quite understand.
Thank you, Councillor. The high cost overlays is basically a bolt-on cost to the base levy that we can charge in areas where there's additional high cost to service that growth. In terms of an example, you'd probably think of, say, a rural setting where we're having to build a new wastewater treatment plant with a low number of users, and you just don't quite have the same marginal cost. The number of gross units to spread that marginal cost. So it's just a bolt-on to factor in those additional costs over and above kind of the aggregate spread of, or average spread of growth cost.
So the bolt-on is a higher rate of levy for that project. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Lucas. Oh, sorry, Deputy Mayor Lucas.
Thank you. Mine's actually a follow-on question from that, because I know when we did the DCs, and I'm using the in particular Middlemarch, and when we did the calculation, and effectively it is, I mean, you put the high cost overlay and it was going to be a really high cost to Middlemarch, and then we adjusted it because it was going to be completely uneconomic for anybody to develop anything in Middlemarch. So is there that ability, because I hear from your answer to your previous question from Councillor Lund that we have the base levy and then we do the add-ons. So is there ability that we can adjust when it becomes totally uneconomic for these small settlements? Is that anywhere in the bill?
Yes, I understand that's the purpose of the high cost overlay.
I think that's more the relief, that you spoke to earlier about being able to have to lower. And lower from the base cost rather than increase from the base cost. Yeah.
And forgive me jumping in again, Mayor Sophie. For me, it has to be pragmatic, because if it's too onerous or too significant, then it has a perverse effect of suppressing growth.
Exactly.
So it has to be balanced. So you have the base levy, the additional high cost overlay, but that has to be pragmatically calculated and framed to support growth.
Agree. Right. Thank you. That's excellent.
Councillor Sims and Councillor Lund.
Sorry, asked and answered.
Thank you, Councillor Lund.
I was alarmed to read at page 1 of the local government submission a statement about the water services. It says that it's unclear how those local authorities that deliver water services in-house, it basically says this bill may inadvertently prohibit those local authorities who provide water services from accessing development levies to fund those services. This is an extremely important point, I would have thought, because we have an in-house water services model.
I'm not sure I can answer that with certainty, but my understanding is that it applies the same. Yeah, sorry, I can't answer that. Sorry, I don't have a good enough answer.
Perhaps, Mr. Ward, is that possibly the reason that the CEO had mentioned, a potential change earlier this week in regard to the delivery?
Not at all, Councillor Lund. Forgive me, I'm just trying to find the page that you're referring to as you were speaking. So until I find that, I can't give you a precise answer. Page 1 of the submission.
Item 7, attachment B, and it's page 41. It's the local government submission that our submission's based on.
We'll just clarify that's Taituara, which is the local government professionals. So there's local government New Zealand, and there's Taituara, which is the local government professionals, Aotearoa. Good catching of that one.
Just while Mr. Ward's looking at that, in that same submission, it talks about just in overall terms the cost of growth and how much is actually captured at the minute, by councils, and it says that in 4 of the 5 councils, the 7 major metro councils in New Zealand, 4 of those 5 councils, half or less of the growth costs are recovered. Do we know how we sit in overall terms here in Dunedin?
No, sorry.
I just want to take an adjournment, please, just for some advice. Thank you. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That is carried. Back to order, and we've got a draft resolution up on the board which addresses the good spotting of Councillor Lund. So we haven't got the exact wording to put in the submission, however the staff will wordsmith that. The other option was to bring it back to the next council meeting, so I think this covers that. So if there's no more questions, I'll move it and we will get into debate. You want to second it? Okay, thank you. So I'll move the resolution that the committee approves the draft Dunedin City Council submission on the partial exposure draft of the Local Government Infrastructure Funding Amendment Bill with an additional point consistent with the Taitawara submission regarding in-house water services and their ability to recover levies. B, authorises the Chief Executive to make any minor editorial amendments to the submission. First of all, thanks again to the team for the great submission and for the clarity around the submission. I really like the way that you worked on the Taitawara submission, because there are, as I've said, a huge amount of submissions coming towards us, so it's great when we can work on other submissions that other organisations have made. It was interesting to learn more about the development contributions and the development levies, also that the government was planning to make sure that growth paid for growth, but often the devil is in the detail. I think that this is definitely going to change the way that the DCC works. It's changing the way to be more responsive to developers, but also creating a much more challenging environment. It's great that it goes on to the DCs are there till 2030 while we figure out how to do the machinations of this. I especially want to thank Councillor Lund for pointing out the need for the clarity on the levies, but I think it's a good submission and I am in support. Are there any other speakers? Councillor van der Vis.
Yeah, I'm happy to support this as well. It does raise quite a few issues which I think have lurked with us for a very long time, especially that we were a wee bit slow perhaps getting into development contributions. And the limitations of the development contribution framework. This levies tool that's been proposed, I think, is going to be an improvement. And I do see a potentially vast improvement for Dunedin especially. If we have the statement that basically we want to clarify that the Crown should not be exempt from development levies. Crown-owned entities are exempt from tax, but you've got levies, you've got fees and charges, you've got all sorts of other ways of essentially raising revenue. The potential here for us is to be able to actually have the user pays for a whole range of things, including our university, schools, hospitals. My only disappointment was that there have been a number of questions that haven't been able to be answered in this meeting, and I understand why someone's not available. My hope is that the questions that have been asked, and a question by Councillor Lund that I was also interested in the answer of, which is how do we compare currently with the amount that we get from development contributions compared to some other major cities. If we could get that information circulated to all councillors afterwards and have the questions that haven't been able to be asked, I'd very much appreciate it. But support the submission and looking forward.
Thank you, Councillor Lund. Then Councillor Weatherall.
I support this submission and I want to commend the team. It was well written, raised a lot of very important points, including in paragraph 13 the definition of what constitutes substantial, which as the report points out, this would be a key matter of contention between councillors and developers and a matter that carries a high risk of litigation. Well done, team. Having said that, there is something that does concern me, and that is that in paragraph 16, which has been discussed already how the council is reserving itself to remit or to reduce the amount of levies that present a disproportionate cost relative to the price of land or housing in an area that would effectively prevent growth in that settlement. Now, that says to me that the council can basically pick winners. It can control growth. It can determine which villages grow and which villages don't. But on balance, I'm heartened in paragraph 10 where the submission does say that it is to ensure, the intent is to ensure that the cost of new service is fairly distributed between existing and new development. So well done, team.
Councillor Weatherall.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie. Round 2. Very briefly, again, well done, staff. Another good submission with the recommendations once again capturing fairness. We are all fully aware our ageing Three Waters and roading infrastructure is facing necessary significant upgrades ahead. And the last thing we need is shortfalls from new developments, whether private or Crown-owned, impacting our ability to deliver our upgrades within budgets. It's all about supporting smart, well-located growth that is affordable to service and is sustainable. This submission should not be viewed as a barrier to growth, but a request for clarification of fairness to enable good decision making. I'm happy to support. Thank you.
Councillor Sims.
Thank you, Mayor Sophie, and foreshadow that I'll also be supporting this. In my ward of the Tyree, in 22 years that I've lived there, the population has doubled, and I think the future development strategy anticipates the population of the Tyree will reach 30,000 people within the next 10 years. The stormwater infrastructure has been improved with some positive results. Thank you, Mr. Ward. The wastewater infrastructure is in the process of being conclusively improved. Thank you, Mr. Ward. The roading network is exactly the same as it was in 2003, despite serious shortcomings being identified by the DCC in 2003 and again in 2013. Rightly or wrongly, at the moment, there is an impression that development contributions are collected in one area and then spent in another. Perhaps an impression for those on the Tyree that the DCC has hoovered up enormous quantities of development contributions and then spent them building a shared path to Port Chalmers. I strongly support a much more targeted approach, both in terms of rates and with this proposal for the development levies. I'd just like to signal a wee warning in respect to paragraph 11, which has Councillor Vandiver salivating, and I accept the sentiment, but I wonder whether we need to communicate what the intent of that is to some of those institutions before they read it in this. I'm just adding that in there. But certainly I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak? Just a quick right of reply. I noted that everyone complimented the staff on this submission, and it is a really good submission, especially when they're probably feeling a little bit submitted out, and there are more to come, and hopefully in our own minds the jigsaw pieces will come together, because there is a huge amount of government change here. And I appreciate Councillor Vandiver that you talked about the limitations of the development contributions framework, so it was great to see the development levies hopefully have a fairer system coming through. I also note what people have said about the Crown being requested to pay for development levies, because sometimes the Crown does put quite amount of pressure on our infrastructures, and that is a balance of let's talk about a new hospital and the pressure it might put on our infrastructure and how much we levied for that. So we just need to think about that as well. I also note, Councillor Sims, that you supported thinking about targeted rates, and that wasn't really mentioned here, but in the funding and financing tools that Council are looking for, that will probably be part of our toolkit, and we have to balance all of these up again. Councillor Weatherall, especially around, I thought smart, well-located growth was exactly what we should aim to do. So thank you, everyone, and I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstentions? That is carried. We'll move on to the submission for the Emergency Management Bill. Mr. Mike Costello and Ms. Brandy Sexton will speak to the report. Welcome to the table. Did you have any opening comments?
No, look, I think we support the intent of the emergency management bill. I think in terms of an organisation, it's just the implications on resourcing and planning and everything else. I think that we've raised in the submission that we've provided.
So can I just ask a question? There's was it $82.8 million over 4 years? Is that for all of the councils in New Zealand?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And do we actually have any numbers for how it might impact our council as an unfunded mandate?
No.
But the implication being that we would have to train more staff to have more management and training available, and that would be where the cost was?
I believe so. In terms of the, because one of the requirements is that we have to be resourced at all times, so it puts more pressure on the training of staff and having those staff available for, rather than just making do with what we've got. So it does create extra resourcing and planning requirements on us. I haven't seen the breakdown of what that 82.8 million is. It's just something that was in the regulatory impact statement.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but how would that impact on smaller councils? Would the same expectation be there that they have emergency management personnel available 24/7?
I believe so.
Gosh.
I believe it's the same across the country. Yeah.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? Deputy Mayor Lucas and Councillor Vandervis.
I had a similar question to Mayor Sophie, because that seems to me to be a fundamental thing, is that this is another unfunded mandate, and I'm not sure whether our submission is, it is strong, but whether we need to be really clear that that's another issue, especially with the rates capping comes in, we've got to take that in as well. But one of the other question that I had was on paragraph 33 on page 57 that flows on to 58, where it talks about infrastructure is able to function to the fullest possible extent during and after an emergency. And DCC is an essential infrastructure provider. And maybe this is directed at Mr. Ward. So, and I'm just thinking of the recent emergencies that have occurred up north. So the way that reads, I know it says to the fullest possible extent, but what it's implying is that the infrastructure must always be able to operate regardless of what the emergency is. Is that what that's implying?
That's certainly an interpretation, and as you say, that is a very high bar to set. And is it a practicable and an affordable bar for us to achieve? And that's what we're seeking to reflect in the submission.
Yeah, and I am concerned about that, and I've read some things from the Mayor of Gisborne about, they constantly, they just have one emergency and then basically they're preparing ready for the next emergency. It's right across the country. This is makes a very high bar and quite onerous on councils.
And if I may, in response, it also speaks to the nature of emergencies. They're not singular in nature, and they're not predictable in nature. The very notion of it being an emergency, so therefore the level of resilience required to deal with any scenario of any particular composition is impracticable for us to achieve.
Councillor Vandervis.
Just a bit of clarification on the smaller councils where basically emergency management personnel need to be available. By available, is it anticipated that people could be on call, or like, say, with some of the smaller volunteer fire brigades, they could just be rang up and then able to respond? Or does available mean someone's actually being paid to be waiting at an office somewhere to do something?
I don't think it means to be available waiting as in a fire brigade. I think it's more around the implications of the fact that you will have put all those people through the training and will be completely resourced from that point of view. Whereas for us, we're at various stages with people in terms of the training that we actually put them through, enough to cover our needs, but this may demand more of that. So that's the concern for us.
So available basically means personnel that have appropriate training and could be called up in an emergency at any time, but aren't actually on the payroll necessarily.
I believe so.
And also, I was looking at 20 here. It says the DCC notes the emergency management reform, which is the purpose of the bill, has one of its objectives of strengthening the role of iwi Māori in emergency management. However, there is no reference to the Treaty of Waitangi in the bill itself. What reference to the Treaty of Waitangi did you want for an emergency management bill?
I think the point we're making there is that it is odd to ask for that strengthening of the iwi in the bill itself, but then not reference the treaty.
But you've asked, basically, you've complained that there's no reference to the Treaty of Waitangi. What reference to the Treaty of Waitangi would fix your objection? What is there in the Treaty of Waitangi that you want referred to for the emergency management bill?
Just actually referring to it in the bill.
So I've got Councillor Hall, then Councillor Treble, but can I just jump in? I'm just for something for you to think about. Is I was reading very quickly the Local Government New Zealand submission where it talks about civil liability protections around clause 203, which provides immunity from civil claims. And it just, in their submission, it notes that civil liability protections largely apply during a state of emergency or transition period and do not extend clearly to actions taken prior to a declaration. So there's something there about good faith. Does that relate back to something about the chief executive responsibilities? What I'm worried about is the risk to an organisation, and I think we've seen a lot of disasters or emergencies happening, and what is the liability for council? So is that not clear in the bill?
So I don't believe that it changes that civil liabilities issue, but I think for the chief executive it places more onus on being resourced up to actually meet the needs of the emergency and have resources available to it, and that becomes an auditable thing in terms of being required to actually have done that and be audited on.
That'll come up to audit and risk, no doubt. Councillor Hall and Councillor Treadwell.
I had 2 of my 3 questions stolen, but that's all right.
Answered, I think. We won't
Answered,
talk about stolen anymore, we shall say answered.
So, page 57, paragraph 30. How will the National Emergency Planning Standard reflect Dunedin's unique hazard profile rather than imposing a minimum standard becoming the ceiling on our preparedness?
Thank you. The concern with this, it's probably not that dissimilar to the concerns you've heard about the planning standards for development as well, and we haven't seen them. And so if they are very prescriptive, they could in fact impose a standard that has to be applied everywhere to the same extent and might not provide the opportunity to craft things outside of that box that meet local needs. So if they're a base set of standards, that's great. It raises the bar and provides consistency. But if they limit opportunity to respond to local needs, that becomes a problem.
Councillor Treadwell and then Councillor Lund.
Tēnā koe, Your Worship, and tēnā kōrua. My question addresses something on page 54, item 8 of the submission summary. So we're seeking clarity on potential repercussions for councils if the expectations are not met. I was curious if you had found any indication of what those repercussions might be, or if they are present but unclear?
Still be unclear at this stage. But certainly the financial one is real. Yeah.
Okay, so there is an indication. Sorry, so there is an indication of financial repercussion in the existing legislation, eh?
Yes, in terms of the cost to all councils across from the regulatory impact statement. Yeah.
Okay, appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Lund.
Just in paragraph 31, it talks about the enforcement powers and how the Director General of the Emergency Managers has broad powers to enforce requirement. So my question is, for example, so we have a flood event in South Dunedin, and we have measures, for example, discharge into the Kaikorai stream, which would eliminate a large part of that flooding. But as I understand it, potentially there's some opposition to doing that, and also there are other parts of infrastructure around South Dunedin that require the permission of the Otago Regional Council, and that permission was not given in the 2015 floods, which created a problem. So, as a council, can we not ask the Director General to provide us with that authority to operate that type of infrastructure, so that we can be assured that it will work?
Really good question, Councillor, and thank you. I'm just reading what we've written here in terms of the role of the Director General. That may be an avenue. Obviously, what we do in an emergency still has to be cognizant of the legislative framework in which we operate and what provisions for exemptions under those requirements, such as discharging to areas where you don't have a discharge permit. So that it might be that is a particular scenario that we could contemplate in our region that might require the intervention of the Director General. I'm not sure I have a specific answer ready for you here and now.
Okay, Councillor Van Vis.
In terms of getting a specific answer, can we be assured that in the event of a major flooding event that in 2015 was made worse by the non-activation of the big pump out to Tahuna because we didn't have regional council permission, can we be assured that for the next flooding event that pump will be activated whether we have permission or not?
I wasn't here for that particular event, so I can't comment on circumstances at that time. But we work closely with the regional councils to ensure that all mechanisms we have available, physical mechanisms we have available to us in those situations, are deployed and have been in the time I've been here.
Okay, my other question relates to paragraph 19, where it says that Maori are disproportionately affected by emergencies. Can you tell us how Maori are particularly disproportionately affected by emergencies?
Page 49 of the covering document. That might relate to where marae are usually built, perhaps.
Okay, thank you. When we look at risk from climate events or other emergencies, we're looking at the hazard itself, exposure and vulnerability. And so those factors look across a variety of socioeconomic situations. They also look at where you are physically. So we know that many of our Maori communities are at lower elevations, closer to sea level or in areas more prone to flooding. And the same set of factors that lead to poor health outcomes and other socioeconomic indicators across communities are also in effect in that vulnerability definition as well. So that's what that reference is to.
So you're saying that in emergencies, Maori are disproportionately affected because they live in more flood-prone areas?
There's the potential for that if you are looking at the population of people who live in a flood-prone area and your emergency is a flood. In many parts of the community that you would find a larger proportion potentially of Maori or Pacifica or other populations, other vulnerable populations from a socioeconomic standpoint potentially as well. Not, I would say it's not solely, but that concern, it's a broader concern than just Maori.
Councillor Chambers?
Yeah, just on the same point, actually, I think, isn't this information coming from central government telling us that Maori and other communities are disproportionately affected by emergencies and therefore they want us to address that? So this it's not for us to answer that question. We've been told that that's the case by central government. But
I don't think we go. I think we'll just take it as read at the moment. I would, if there's no more questions, I will move that the committee approves the Dunedin City Council's submission with any amendments, which we don't have, to the Governance and Administration Committee on the Emergency Management Bill, brackets number 2, authorises the Chief Executive to make any minor editorial amendments to the submission, authorises the Mayor or Delegate to speak at any hearings. Is there a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor Lucas. In looking at this, there is obviously a lot of submissions. I think I should stop talking about how many submissions there are, but there are a lot that we need to look through. It's really important to have that emergency management reform. We certainly support it because it does clarify the roles and responsibilities, and I think sometimes that's a challenge. I also made in my notes that it's important really to have that community response, and we've seen that in many of the emergency events around the country. It is the community at a local level that respond, and that's why I did ask about those smaller councils and how they are going to be supported to respond to those events. Also that it was including the Civil Defence Emergency Management Group plans and input into them, and I think that we also need to understand our roles as councillors in civil defence. And expanding tools to improve assurance through the rules of compliance orders, and expanding the infrastructure providers that should be recognised under the legislation, because wastewater, which was brought up, wasn't actually part of the submission. The Local Government New Zealand submission has said that the local government supports these emergency management reforms because reform is necessary, and the amount of pressure on the increasing number and frequency and severity of climate-driven storms, floods, landslides and coastal hazards that we've all seen playing out over the last few weeks. Also, the LGNZ says the new emergency management system must be workable, affordable and deliverable for all councils. And one of the things that is brought up is funding, because how are we going to fund the unfunded mandate of $82.4 million spread across all of the councils? And then that also talks about a little bit about rates funding. How are we going to take on extra responsibilities without extra funding? I did ask that question around risk as well for council, because that is a bit of a challenge. If the director, I can't quite remember the title, comes in and tells us off, what's our responsibility under that, and especially around the chief executive's responsibility, because they have a lot of that's where the buck stops, unfortunately. I think it was a really good submission. Thank you for that. And we covered all of the points that I saw that Local Government New Zealand covered as well. Would anyone else like to speak to Okay, therefore I will put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
Abstentions? I declare the motion is carried. Now, items for consideration by the Chair. I think, Councillor Vandervis, you brought up that you would like some of the questions that you put forward answered. Okay, and I'm sure that the staff have noted that. Is there anything else?
Oh, sorry, not just my questions. There were a range of questions that weren't able to be answered. It'd be lovely to get them in email for all of us if possible.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure the staff have noted those. Nothing else. Therefore, I will close with karakia. Kia whakaari te tapu, kia wātia ai te ara, kia turu ki whakataha ai, kia turu ki whakataha ai, haumia hui tai ki ai. Thank you everyone, and I declare the meeting closed at 11:33.